Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Packernet Podcast. I am your host and resident fanalist, as always, Ryan Schlip. Check us out online, packernet.com. Find me on Twitter, pack_data. So, I always get excited when I remember some of my off-season projects, which, by the way, if you remember some that I've done, whether you enjoyed them or not, please remind me, especially if you enjoyed it, but there's so many little off-season things that come up. It's like, oh yeah, that thing that I did. This is usually when I do all the projects, except sometimes I start them and then it gets to be too big and I say, you know what, let's just not do this right now. But I was reminded of one today. It's somewhat intuitive as you start to try to answer certain questions. It's like, oh yeah, that's right, I did that thing again. But a lot of the time, and I've said this before, I will kind of just get in a rut of saying things over and over and over and over and over again, and either I have not elaborated in a long time, or I've never really elaborated, or we just never really looked super deep into it. And I thought it would be a good idea to really assess our roster in a somewhat logical fashion, right? There's no perfect way to do it. In fact, that's one of the things that always knocks me off these projects is I start doing it, and then you start doing the what about, and you end up just quitting. You either power through and say, I don't care, it's not perfect, nothing's perfect, keep going, or you end up quitting. And I've gotten a lot better at just saying, shut up and just keep going. And so what I want to look at, and we're not going to do every position today, that was my plan, obviously, because I can't just do anything halfway. It's just going to take too long. We might do a couple more, depending on how long this takes, which shouldn't take very long. But what I did is I laid out all of the positions, and I'm talking about depth as well. Quarterback, RB1, RB2, left guard, left tackle, left guard, all the offensive linemen. Wide receiver 1, 2, 3, 4, tight end 1, 2, defensive tackle 1, 2, 3, 4, edge 1, 2, 3, 4, linebacker 1 and 2 and 3, cornerback 1, cornerback 2, nickelback, safety 1, safety 2. In other words, guys that are at some point gonna be on the field. Could probably do safety 3, but a lot of teams don't do that. The idea being, let's actually see where people rank. It's easy to do this with quarterback, right? You got the 14th ranked quarterback. Okay, well, every team basically has one quarterback with the exception of just a couple, and usually it's not going to end up being a top 5 quarterback anyways if it's some 42-year-old that popped in for 5 games because somebody got hurt, so you don't have to worry about it too much. And a lot of times we'll look at our, wide receiver 2 or 3 and compare them against the entire NFL and say that's not good enough, rather than comparing our wide receiver 3 against other teams' wide receiver 3s, or our CB2 or 1 or nickel compared to all the others. And I thought of this because Mr. Slap Happy Cookie, Steve Cook, who's always keeping me up to date on all the latest news and whatnot, he showed me something today that I don't usually disagree, but I did disagree with. It's going to sound like I'm picking on the guy because I just talked about him like 2 days ago, but Ryan Wood said cornerback is not a glaring need. They need depth. A lot of positions need depth. Depth is not glaring. And he's right that depth is not glaring, but you have to assume that the issue at corner is depth. And so my immediate retort was, our corners are ranked 55th, 64th, and 103rd via PFF. If those are starting caliber, then you're right. We only need depth and it's not glaring. Personally, I'm not a fan of being 55th, 64th, and 103rd in cornerback rankings. Now, I do know that our defensive coordinator and his staff did some absolute wizardry last year where we had very subpar corners the last 4 or so weeks of the season look really competent because they just didn't get picked on, / our safeties and linebackers got cooked so bad that the corners were kind of left off the hook. But I don't love the idea of just leaving subpar corners in their positions of being subpar corners because we just think it's probably never going to come back to bite us. I don't think that's a very good strategy. I don't know why we were as fortunate as we were, and again, I give the defensive coordinator and our DB coach and all those guys a ton of credit, but I can't depend on that being a thing forever, and if we just find pass rush, then everything's fixed. I agree, it's a huge need. I've already talked about that after the Super Bowl, but I think the Super Bowl broke everybody's brain, and suddenly everything's great. By the way, one of the things we talked about a couple years ago was the idea that pass rush is less important than coverage. The reason being your pass rush is largely a function of coverage. Not having good coverage can absolutely result in not having pass rush. Why? Because the ball gets out too fast and you can't get to the quarterback in time. I don't know if you realize this, but arguably the best cornerback room in the entire NFL is the Philadelphia Eagles. Perhaps part of the reason they're able to get to the quarterback with such regularity is because there's nowhere to go with the football because they have the best corners in all of football. And the reason it came up a couple years ago, if you don't remember, is the fact that we had a lot of issues under Joe Barry. It was one of those things where we started to pick it up in the second half. And one of the things that we did is at some point in the season, we started bringing extra rushers, and we just could not get home. The pass rush was terrible. We stopped doing that. We started dropping more in coverage, and our pass rush improved. It seems entirely counterintuitive. Why would that happen? Why, instead of sending 6, we send 5, in a typical base, or 4. Remember, it was a 3-4, so you send an extra guy in base, that is. How in the world does that improve your pass rush? It improves your pass rush because pass rush, to a large degree, is a function of time. Everybody's going to get to the quarterback eventually. If you give a pass rusher 25 seconds, you think he's not going to get there? Of course he's going to get there. The question is, this is actually very similar to the drops conversation, right? Everybody wants to blame the wide receivers for the drops, and I just introduced the idea that inaccurate passes are a function of drops as well. And I said, well, they need to catch it. Similar to pass rushers, well, you need to be able to get home in less than this, that, or the other. Okay, fine. But let's say they can't. If we can introduce better coverage, then we will see an increase in pass rush. Another way to think about this is take any pass rusher. If you look at this as sort of a function of time, let's say every single rep, the quarterback gets the ball out in 1 second. How many pressures do they get? My guess, 0. Maybe a handful with a couple accidental unblocked plays. So let's say like 5. What if you dial it up to 1.5? That number probably jumps up to 12. What about 2 seconds? Now it's like 25 pressures. What about 2.5 seconds? Now you're talking like 50 pressures. What about 3 seconds? Every single play was 3 seconds. What, like 215 pressures? This is a scale that exists for everybody, and everybody's different. Some people, you dial it down to a certain point or whatever. Everybody's going to have different numbers at each spot. So you have different capabilities in terms of your ability to get there in 1 second, 1.52, 2.53. But then there's another situation of how much time do you actually get? It's kind of a time to throw, but even time to throw is not you could go back and say, okay, what is the average time to throw against the Green Bay Packers? But even that is not great because, one play is 10 seconds, that throws everybody off. If you were to actually do a study of how long does it take typically for the person to get there, or how many opportunities did they have at each time marker, that would be a really interesting thing to look at. How often did Rashawn Gary have more than 2 seconds? How often did he have more than 2.5 seconds? I'm not saying that's the entire problem, and I certainly think that there are pass rush issues with our pass rushers. I do not think Lucas Van Ness is very good. I do not think Rashawn Gary, or really anybody, and I think Rashawn Gary did struggle a lot. But it's entirely too one-dimensional to not recognize, and this has already been studied statistically, that it is true, and it's why coverage is seen as more important than pass rush, because pass rush is a function of coverage. If you improve your coverage, you will improve your pass rush. If there's nowhere to throw the ball, if his first read isn't there consistently because it's taken away and he has to go to a second read, that's more time. More time equals more pressures equals more sacks. If you want more pressures, you have to have better coverage. And being able to shred people right in the middle of the defense on these little 5-yard dump-offs because our linebackers couldn't do anything for half the season is definitely going to hurt your pass rusher's ability to get to the quarterback. Just a thought experiment. I'm not saying that that's exactly what the problem is. I am just saying that I do know that that is absolutely a situation that is real. Just logically, commonsensically, it's obvious that would be the case, right? It's the same thing I've said about quarterbacks. There's how good are you under pressure? How good are you not under pressure? And then it's just a blender at that point. What percentage of the time are you under pressure compared to not under pressure? If you're under pressure 100% of the time, you're going to have you're going to be worse at football. That's true of every quarterback. So this is why football is a team sport. Nothing is just by itself. Why you can't just have, like the NBA, some superstar that just goes out there and scores a bunch of points for you by himself. Wide receivers need quarterbacks. They also need offensive line. If you don't have offensive line, you're not going to have time to be able to run your route. If you don't have a quarterback, it's not going to get to you accurately enough. You're not going to be able to catch as many passes. If you're a quarterback, how good you are is largely dependent on your offensive line, your wide receivers, etc. It is largely on you, but if you don't have time to throw and if you don't have receivers running right routes, catching passes, all that kind of stuff, it's going to reflect poorly on you. It's all, everything works in conjunction with everything else, and nothing is by itself. So yes, I am not a fan of having the 55th, 64th, and 103rd ranked corners. And 103rd is somewhat not exactly. He is a safety, and so I had to grab his grade as a safety, apply it to where it would be on the corners, and if he was listed as a corner, he would be ranked 103rd. It's not his rank as a safety, it's his rank as a corner if he was in the corner thing. It's like a 50-some-odd grade. I don't know what it is. It's bad. So anyways, why don't we go ahead and do the corners? This will take 2 seconds, and the conclusion is pretty straightforward to me. If you look at our CB2 situation, which in this case is Keyshawn Nixon, or you can switch it any which way you want. If we did improve somebody, then Valentine was graded higher, so I made him our CB1. Let's put it that way. Our CB2, Keyshawn Nixon, had a 64 PFF grade. Among CB2s, and this is based on last year, and as I've said, it's not a perfect process. First of all, PFF grades are not the be-all, end-all. I've clearly acknowledged that. Number two, whether these people are actually the CB2 or not, sometimes you got guys that are injured. It doesn't really matter. It's big picture here. 64 overall grade compared to cornerback 2s, he's the 8th highest graded. Houston, also arguably one of the best, if not the best, cornerback rooms. I do think Philly's number 1. Houston is a close number 2. There isn't a close number 3. Houston, Philly, the Jets, Kansas City, Atlanta, Tampa Bay, Carolina are the 7 teams that had better CB2s. Okay. If you look at the nickelback, or our slot corner position, 54.2 grade for Javon Bullard. That ranks 27th. Only Cleveland, Carolina, Pittsburgh, Washington, and New Orleans have worse slot corners than Javon Bullard. Now, I tend to think the Packers are, they'll bring in some people, some general competition. We'll see how it goes. They'll continue to mix and match like they did last year. The safety thing was kind of a rotation. Who plays in the slot, da-da-da-da-da-da. I can't help but think they're going to do what they did with the wide receivers, which is probably going to be a mistake. The same thing that they did with Darnell Savage. They're going to give him time. I don't think it's going to amount to anything. I don't think he's very good. I don't think he's going to be very good. But I'm willing to give him time. I'm thinking the Packers will. If, again, somebody comes in and is just a freak, he's getting replaced, that's just the end of it. But I don't think they're going to actively pursue it, and because they're not going to actively pursue it, they're less likely to actually find it, which means they're most likely going to have him staying in that spot. So I think our slot is going to stay Bullard, and we're just going to sit here, cross our fingers, and hope he gets better. And again, I'm very skeptical. Our CB2 situation is not bad. Here's the deal with CB1. Valentine had a 65.5 grade compared to other CB1s that ranks 26th. Only Tennessee, Minnesota, Jacksonville, Arizona, Las Vegas, and Pittsburgh were worse. Now, if Jair were to stay, we would rank 8th, which is to say we would have a top 10 CB1, a top 10 CB2, and hopefully a improving nickel situation. In fact, I would rather just go get one, and then we have 3 top 10s, and everything's just beautiful. Again, this is why I really didn't want Jair to leave. He was the 8th highest graded CB1 in all of football, and we would have our CB1, we would have our CB2, which the other thing to consider is that if you look at the CB2, you move Valentine over because he becomes your CB2, and now he moves from 8th to 7th. It only goes up 1 spot, but still. He moves up because he has a 65.5 compared to Keyshawn's 64. So he moves ahead of Carolina. Only 6 guys are better. So we have a top 10 CB1, close to a top 5 CB2, and a very young and hopefully aspiring nickelback. However, we don't have that. And so let's assume Valentine does go over to 2. We absolutely need a CB1. This is not good enough. 26th ranked CB1 against guys like what? Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra and DJ Moore. Like, we got to see those guys 6 different times on top of all the other receivers that we're going to have to go against. And you're telling me Valentine is the best we have to offer? It's not good enough. And as far as whether or not we should draft a corner, I tend to think we should. The reason being, I'm saying early, first, second round, largely comes down to, again, I think it's supremely important. I don't think we have any good corners, unlike edge, where I do think Rashawn is a good pass rusher. Yes, he had a down year. I'm well aware of that. I'm just sick of people pretending his down year is some kind of a reflection on his entire career, which it hasn't been. It's a silly notion. Well, that's not good enough. You're right, it's not good enough. But why would you assume that that's what he's going to be for the rest of his career? I mean, I guess you could say he just can't do the 4-3 thing. It's possible, but he did start improving already down the stretch. The bottom line is I at least have some hope. On top of that, Lucas Van Ness, again, I have very little hope in Lucas Van Ness, but he is a elite and supreme athlete that has the ability to make a giant leap. There's an excuse for his first 2 years as to why they would have struggled. Number one, it was his rookie season, and he wasn't the worst in the world. In year 2, everybody on this defense was terrible. Defensive line coach was fired for a reason, and it was an entirely new scheme. So there's at least a path. Valentine has already exceeded expectations. Keyshawn has exceeded expectations. And Bullard is just bad at football. I don't expect Valentine to make some kind of a massive leap. He might, but it's supremely unlikely. But aside from all that is the fact that in the offseason, I absolutely anticipate the Packers addressing edge. So defensive tackle certainly would make sense. Corner, I think, makes probably the most sense. There's probably going to be more defensive line options, which makes it somewhat less likely because the Packers, we know, would be willing to take an edge even if they address it. Defensive tackle, I don't think that they're going to address in the offseason. They might, but there's not a ton of there's a lot of options, not a ton of great options. Depending, we'll see who ends up hitting the market, who gets cut or whatever. But if edge is addressed and wide receiver is addressed, and we have the 26th ranked CB1, I wouldn't mind trying to find a new cornerback, assuming Jair does leave. If he doesn't, then we don't really need to have this conversation. But I think he's going to, based on all the current reports, certainly is feeling that way. If a person like Siobhan Revel were there, I think that would be incredible. And remember, you go out and you get a pass rusher. Then you get a corner that's not only going to help you cover receivers, but is going to help the quarterback hold on to the ball longer, which is going to help your pass rushers improve. And that's all of them. Because it's not just Rashawn Gary getting an extra 0.3 seconds to get to the quarterback. It's Khalil Mack or whoever the guy that we bring in is. It's Van Ness, it's Kingsley, it's Kenny, it's Wyatt. All of them get extra time. And we'll see. Maybe they go out and get a guy like DJ Reed, and then we don't super need to worry about it. We have our CB1, we have our CB2, and we already know the nickel thing is probably not going to change, and we can come off it. But, I think in general, I wanted to do this. And again, you can just completely disregard PFF if you want. That's fine. But you got to have some kind of a metric, some kind of a way of explaining your belief system. If you have a better one, let me know. But based on this, again, there's a lot of belief that we have really good corners and that Bullard is really solid and everything. Our CB1 and our nickel are bad. And it's not even about who it is. You can put Valentine at CB1. You can put Nixon at CB1. The point is you have 2 CB2s, and that's it. Now, one final thought. Tell you what, let's take a break. We'll come back with the one final thought. One final thought on corner. And this is what I talked about with Jair that never really materialized. You could, sort of like the Aqib Talib, I think was this way. If you are able to get, and I don't even know if anyone's doing it anymore, now it's all safety slot stuff, but if you were able to get a guy, let's say it's Jahdae Barron, that could play on the boundary. So if there's 2 wide receivers, your corners would be Jahdae Barron and Carrington Valentine. If you think Jahdae Barron can do that, that might be absolutely perfect because when you get 3 wide receivers, now it's Valentine, Nixon, and Jahdae Barron in the slot. And I don't hate that so much because, the idea being, well, you want your number one to be on the boundary. That's usually true, but what about Amon-Ra St. Brown? You can be better off in this situation. There's a decent amount of number ones, and you can switch it if you want to. If it's Justin Jefferson and you want Mr. Lockdown Jahdae Barron to be on him, then go ahead and do it, and you can put Keyshawn in the slot. Remember, he's versatile that way. He might not be the best, but it's certainly an option, and to have two versatile guys would be pretty awesome, because then you could have Jahdae Barron. Again, we're just daydreaming that he ends up being this lockdown guy that can go outside, inside. You put him wherever he's needed. He goes outside for Justin Jefferson. He comes inside for Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think that is an ideal situation. I don't know how much of a realistic situation it is. The good news for Barron, though, is that he did end up getting moved to the boundary, and you did not see really a reduction in the quality of his play. A lot of times guys are in the slot, and you just have to project. And a lot of times you just assume he can't. It's cool that they actually gave him the opportunity to do it, to move out to the boundary at Texas. And actually, I'm just looking at it now. Not only did he manage, he actually thrived. It was by far his best season. He was a slot/safety as of 2023. His highest year was 2022 with a 77 grade. He's always kind of been in the 70s. He had a 91 in 2024 and a 91 in coverage overall. So it was actually kind of a big breakout year when they moved him over to the boundary. So I don't know, man. He might be kind of a Jair. 5'11", 200 pounds, played a lot in the slot. A lot of people see him as a slot. Packers are like, nah, screw that. They put him on the boundary and just let him cut it up, you know. I think if there's a knock on him, it's probably that he's 23 years old more so than anything else. I don't know. I'm talking myself into this. I got to go back and take a second look at Jahdae Barron. Again, I doubt that they would do that. I think Bullard is going to be our slot guy next year, despite my protest. But again, it's a good idea to kind of open up our ideas. I have a bad habit of pigeonholing myself. You know, Jahdae Barron's a slot guy, so we're not drafting him, and then you just move on with your life. My goal is to not be surprised. And if you keep doing that, well, we're never going to draft him, and he's going to be gone, and that's too late, and we don't draft people that short. Whatever. You're just going to be wrong every time. So, certainly an option. Not a terrible one either, if you believe that he can do it. All right. Let's do that again. That was fun. I'm very hesitant to do offensive line because I know our left tackle is not graded out super well, and that's going to annoy me because I care way too much, probably not too much. I care a lot about pass blocking, more so than PFF does, and that's going to give me results that I don't like. So, and running back, we already know the answer. We have one of the best RB1s, probably the best RB2, so that's really not worth looking into. Grok and all the other AIs need to be made aware of that because it keeps constantly telling me we need running backs. We don't jag off. I think edge and defensive tackle are the ones that I'm most curious about because we know that we're not getting as much on the top end. I'm kind of curious beyond that how we're doing. By the way, one of the other things that I wanted to do before I started going down a different direction and doing this differently was to just kind of look at all of our guys and how they graded out. Just to kind of go through the grades. I don't know if we've even done that. I'm sure somebody's done that for you, and we maybe looked at it at one point, kind of the season-ending grades, but it's worth noting that our lowest graded person by a pretty wide margin was TJ Slayton. So let me just say for the 5,000th time, as much as I'm open to bringing pretty much everybody back at some cost, TJ Slayton is just no. No, never, under any circumstances, not ever, no, never, not, no, never. Okay, and if you want a big boy on the staff, then go ahead and get him. Second round, third round, I don't care. But I'm over it. I'm done. I don't want to do it anymore. He gets way too many opportunities. I'm tired of it. So maybe we will do that tomorrow. We'll see. But I don't know why I'm so driven to do defensive tackle. Let's do defensive tackle. Before we do, I want to add in this little wrinkle. If we look at cornerback and kind of combine a little bit. If we look at our boundary corners, the Green Bay Packers, just adding up the PFF grades, rank 14th. If we look at all cornerbacks combined, including our slot, the Packers are ranked 26th in terms of their corners. If Jair were to return, and let's say we kick Keyshawn in the slot, just to be clear, let's go through this. Jair actually would be 11th. I thought he was a little higher, but 11th. CB2 would be 8th. Our slot corner would be 23rd. Our boundary corners would rank 12th in the league. And then our corners as a whole would rank 12th. Our boundary corners would be ranked 9th. So Jair, or let's say somebody comparable to Jair. So just adding one piece on the outside can make a pretty big difference, depending on what they want to do. Again, are we moving Keyshawn? Are we getting rid of Keyshawn? Are we putting Bullard in there? Probably Bullard, like I said, but I don't know. All right, let's take our second break. We'll come back and look at our defensive tackle situation. We'll be right back. So right now, again, going based on grades, not going based on... so I took the top 4 in terms of snap count and then ranked the grades from there to do the 1, 2, 3, 4. Right now, Devontae Wyatt is our DT1. Now, he's not really, right? We know Kenny is, but that's how I did it for everybody else. Even with Devontae Wyatt being our highest graded, he ranks 22nd among DT1s. It's not good enough. DT2, which is still not Kenny, is Carl Brooks, ranks 17th, so kind of middle of the road. Kenny, as a defensive tackle number 3, is actually not bad. He ranks 10th. Of course, that's not what he gets paid to do, but there we are. By the way, as a just pure DT1, he would rank 29th out of 32. And then DT4, which is TJ Slayton, ranks 25th. So even as the depth starts to go out, we don't have the depth to, as the talent goes down, we go down with it. Let's put it that way. If you look at overall defensive tackle strength, the Green Bay Packers rank 20th. Obviously not good enough. Now, what happens, hypothetically, if we add a solid defensive tackle? Let's just give him a 70, but then also push everybody down. Our 2 becomes our 3, 3 becomes our 4, etc. Actually, before we do that, let me just swap out, it's not going to make a huge difference, but let's swap out Slayton with Colby Wooden. Wooden is slightly better, but not too much. So he would rank, he would rank 15th among DT4s, even with a 50 PFF grade. He's still above average. And then overall as a team, we would rank 16th. But let's bump everybody down, and then again, give us somebody with a 70 grade. If we could find that, it's still not a very good DT1. It's 18th, so that's below average. For reference, actually, it's not 18th. I'm looking at the Excel numbers, not the actual numbers. If we want to be dead average, 70.2. Above average would be obviously above that. Top 10, you're looking at being about an 80 PFF grade. Top 5, 85. So it's, it's a big jump there, but then our DT2 would be 13th overall. DT3 would be 9th overall. Our DT4, who in this case would be Kenny Clark, would be ranked 8th, 7th. Keep looking at the Excel numbers, not the rank numbers. And then our overall defensive line rank would be 12th. Still not the greatest in the world, but, again, that's sort of the impact of just adding one top player, is how much it moves everything. We're getting rid of Slayton, replacing him with Kenny, replacing Kenny with Brooks, replacing Brooks with Wyatt, and then replacing Wyatt with somebody, hopefully, that's actually pretty good. Similar to talking about Jahdae Barron, there's a guy that's coming to my mind all of a sudden that I do like, but is starting to feel a lot more perfect when you think about, again, like Jahdae Barron, how he kind of fixes 2 problems at once. He gets you your number 1 and kind of upgrades the slot. I can't help but think about Kenneth Grant. Because on one hand, I'm looking at TJ Slayton and I'm saying enough is enough. And I think, okay, well, we might need a big dude. Maybe not necessarily. I mean, we've seen Kenny Clark play nose tackle for a lot of years. We know Hafley likes his penetrating defensive tackles. Maybe he's not as concerned, a 310-pound guy that can play the run like Walter Nolan. Maybe that's more than enough, and he brings pass rush. I'm just saying, if you can get a guy at the back of the first, like Kenneth Grant, who is, 330-something or bigger. What is he? 6'3", about 340, actually. But has some freakish athleticism so that he's not, he doesn't have great stats, which is the problem. And if he did, he'd probably go a lot earlier. But he has the athleticism of a much smaller guy. He can play at 340 and move like a guy that's 310. And I just can't help but wonder if somebody like that really would be a benefit. If you can possibly replace Slayton and maybe get a new number one. Not that it's a super high bar. Because again, I am really impressed with his athleticism. Especially, you watch Walter Nolan, and it's great watching him, but he's on the other end of the spectrum. The guy is not fast. He is very, he can be agile. He can fly. If you just need to do a little stunt or a twist or something, sure, he can go flying over there. But you want him to track somebody down, or he's a lumbering dude. And then you turn on the 340-pounder Kenneth Grant that you assume is going to be every bit as slow, if not slower, and he's flying around. And I just can't help but assume that there's something in there in terms of pass rush potential. And look, if you're using him in a 3-4, two-gapping thing, or if he's getting double-teamed or whatever, yeah, it's going to be a lot less. But I don't know that would necessarily happen as much. And maybe, again, we can kind of kill two birds with stone. You get your one tech, guy that can take on some double teams, but also a guy that can shoot a gap if you need him to. Again, this isn't necessarily that he's my favorite, although he may end up that way by the time this is done. I got to go back through it again. It's just a matter of when you really start to identify the issues and look at it, it does make some good sense to me. Plus, massive program, played for a national champion defense. Packers love that. How many times did they attack Georgia when they were on top? I wouldn't be surprised if Michigan, Ohio State are teams that they're taking a real strong look at. And again, if I'm being honest, I do think corner, defensive tackle are going to be the two most likely options for the Packers in the first round. I think there's plenty of options. Edge is up there. I think they're going to do something in free agency which might make that slightly less urgent. Again, they may do it anyways. They might go get Max Crosby and get a pass rusher, and I wouldn't be opposed to that. But assuming they dabble in wide receiver, assuming they dabble in edge, which I think is going to be the one I'm most confident in, they're going to get an edge rusher. Wide receiver a little less so, but I think there's some decent options if they wanted to go that route. And obviously none of this matters. What matters is what they do, and then we can revisit this. But those are the two positions that, just in my mind, when you look at the most important and the ones I don't necessarily think they're going to address, very well could. There's plenty of money to address all of them if they wanted to. But the more I think, defensive tackle might be at the top of my list. If you were just asking me today, what are they going to draft or who are they going to draft? Defensive tackle's probably at the top of the list. Corner, I think, is really important, but I do think they really want pass rush. And I think that's not just on the edge. I think that's on the interior. I think they really want to bolster the defensive line as a whole. I think they recognize they don't have a lot of D-line talent. They recognize Kenny's on the way out. They recognize Slayton's on the way out. I think it's an urgent need that it can't easily be rectified in free agency. Again, I could be proven wrong depending on what happens with trades and cuts and everything else. To me, there's not a lot of great options right now. And then as far as options, again, Jahdae Barron might be a great option for the Packers. I don't think it's necessarily going to be. And so I just feel like there's less that's going to be out there, but I don't know. Travis Hunter and Will Johnson will be gone, and so you're really kind of just looking at what? Siobhan Revel, Benjamin Morrison, Azaria Thomas. That's probably it. Maybe Trey Amos, but I don't think so. He continues to fall down the list. He is now at the back of the second round. If he continues, he'll end up being in the third round for whatever reason. And I don't know. I just don't maybe Siobhan Revel. I mean, if he's around, that could be a big one. But there's a lot of question marks with him as well. And on top of that, again, I'm skeptical of the corners. I don't know that the Packers are as much, and we'll see what they end up doing. I think they really like Keyshawn. In fact, I know they like Keyshawn. I mean, Gutekunst is a different question. I know the team and the locker room and the coaches love Keyshawn. But I think that carries a lot of weight with Gutekunst as well. I think Valentine they see as at least good enough. I mean, they put him out there over Stokes and whatnot. And then, Bullard, I don't know. I don't know how they feel about Bullard, but I also think that they are a franchise that's willing to give people opportunities to right the ship. So, again, it's kind of a question of who's going to be available, and also how much of a priority they're going to put on it. Mason Graham will be gone, but Walter Nolan might be there. Kenneth Grant, Derek Harmon, Tyleek Williams, possibly Alfred Collins, in that same range, ranging to about where Amos was or whatever. There's just I think more options. I think there's better options for me, and I got to investigate more. I just feel like there's questions, like Jahdae Barron, can he play outside, and Siobhan Rev, with injuries and all this difference. I mean, Walter Nolan, I guess there's some questions as well, but then you look at Walter Nolan was like a number 1 overall prospect, and Gutekunst is just going to be slobbering all over himself, and Kenneth Grant is just an athletic freak that played for a national champion. Gutekunst is just going to be losing his mind, and Derek Harmon is a pass rush freak, and I think Gutekunst is going to love that guy. You know what I mean? It just feels like defensive tackle. Now, edge is another big one. Again, the only reason I would say it's not edge is because I think they're going to address it, and there's a big question of how many of these guys are going to be gone. Mykel Williams, Jalen Walker, James Pierce, Shamar Stewart, and Mike Green are all currently seen as going before the Packers, but any one of them could fall to the Packers. We saw that in the mock from yesterday. But there's a billion of them, and if they start to fall, it becomes much more possible. If they're all gone, then there's like nothing left. I guess that's a little unfair, but you got Nick Scorton, Jack Sawyer, Ezukaru, Eziruaku, out of Boston College, JT Tuimalau. I don't know, man. I mean, there are 2 Ohio State guys there, and there's a Boston College guy there, so there's the connection with Hafley for whatever that's worth. It hasn't proven to be worth anything. We keep trying to make that a connection, and every person we saw that he coached in college, he doesn't care. Every Boston College player that we think, maybe that he doesn't care. Or Gutekunst doesn't care. They've never gone that direction before. And I'm sure if Hafley was yanking on his coattails saying, bro, we got to do this, he would do it. So I would say be on alert for edge if they start to fall, which I doubt because it's obviously a premium position and somebody's going to be obsessed with these guys. Jalen Walker, I doubt falls just because even if there's questions, he's one of those guys that some teams, they're not interested. Some teams are going to be tripping over themselves to get that guy. But we got to see, guys like Shamar Stewart and Mike Green are maybe a little bit more, Shamar is more of the big 280. Gutekunst would probably love him, but I don't know if it's for everybody. Mike Green, similarly, the pro day was, or not pro day, was it East-West? Where did he go? I don't remember. But being able to be up against different, bigger competition was a big deal. But smaller school guy, there might be enough questions to let him slip. If any of these guys start to slip, edge becomes increasingly more of an option. If not, if Green, Stewart, Pierce, Walker, and Williams, and Abdul Carter obviously are all gone and the Packers don't trade up, I'm back to thinking defensive tackle is most likely, corner is the next most likely. Just my opinion, and that's as of right now. Obviously, we got to wait and see who gets re-signed, who gets released, which are 2 different questions, right? We got guys that are currently not Green Bay Packers. Right, unless they get re-signed, they're free agents. They're not coming back. And then there's other guys that could potentially be cuts. We can talk about that whole thing on another episode. But we got to sort through all that with free agency. We got to check that out. The combine is coming up rapidly. That's going to be a lot of fun to answer some more questions. But yeah, I guess that's kind of where I'm at. This podcast is killing me because I want to go back and start watching these guys again to get excited. I need to watch more new prospects, but I'm like, I want to watch that guy again. He was so much fun. That's kind of where I'm at. Feel free to call in 608-501-0718. Let me know your thoughts on all this. Obviously, I'm going deep down certain assumptions, and if this happens, where do we go? A lot of people are in very different trains of thought. So let me know your thoughts. But I am going to get out of here. I'm actually going to go do Packernet After Dark because we got enough calls now. I will talk to you tonight, tomorrow, whatever. Have a good one. Bye-bye.